Okay, thanks, Cahirlock, and apologies. I wasn't able to listen into much of the earlier discussion because I was busy with something else in this place. But this is a very important issue, and it's of particular interest, I have to say, in my own area, because there's plans for very significant offshore renewable energy development off the east coast of Ireland. And obviously the starting point, I think, is anybody who's concerned about the climate crisis that we are facing knows that we have to rapidly develop renewable energy resources to reduce the amount of fossil fuels we use and save the planet from disaster, and that we have to do that as a matter of urgency. So people for profit are very committed to the idea that we must do that. However, I have to say that the particular model that is being pursued for the development of offshore renewable energy by this government and recent governments is one that I think is very problematic. It's problematic, first of all, because we're going to hand over those resources by and large, or almost entirely, to private companies. Private companies like the French state energy company. Now, the idea that our natural resources are going to be handed over to private companies, and that, for example, that the French state is going to benefit more from offshore renewable wind than the people of this country, just seems to me absolutely crazy. And these developers and those companies, those international for-profit energy companies, have no obligation whatsoever to provide us with security of supply. They have no obligation whatsoever to give us energy at affordable prices. In fact, as we've seen with the recent cost of living crisis, much of which were energy price hikes, these companies are more than willing to profiteer off the back of energy energy shortages or issues in the market, and profiteer and generate a very significant cost of living crisis for ordinary people. So first of all, we have a fundamental problem with the fact that we're handing over these resources to private for-profit companies rather than the state developing its own renewable energy resources to benefit the people of this country, our society, as well as address the urgent question of the climate. But the other very important point is that we don't just have a climate crisis, we have a biodiversity crisis, biodiversity emergency. And the second emergency is often less focused on, but is in fact arguably as urgent, if not more urgent, than the climate crisis, because the possibility of whole ecosystems collapsing because we're destroying biodiversity, in this case marine life, and that we don't pay enough regard to actually protecting the marine, means we could end up actually cutting off our nose to spite our face. Very seriously cut it off. And it's worth pointing out that 50% of the world's oxygen comes from phytoplankton in the sea. And it's not something I knew until I became familiar with this, but phytoplankton, it grows in shallow water, because it needs sunlight. Now, this is the stuff of life, literally. It is the reason there is life on the planet. So if we destroy marine biology and our marine environment and marine biodiversity, we will actually remove the basis for human existence on the planet and for the existence of life on the planet. And why do I mention that? Well, because Sandbanks, if shallow water, relatively shallow water is important, then sandbanks are very important. And under the Habitats Directive, this is recognised and they are protected. I think it's under Annex 1. And it's recognised how important sandbanks are. Sandbanks are also incredibly important for, to protect the coast against erosion, which is another feature of climate change, of course, rising sea levels and so on. But one of the big protections of the coastal environment are the sandbanks. But yet, where is it that we're going to put these massive industrial wind farms on sites dictated by private developers, not based on sustainable marine spatial planning? Right? We're going to put them on the sandbanks. Precisely the sensitive and vulnerable environments, which are also the spawning grounds for many of the fish, which provide livelihood for our fishers. So, I mean, to cut a long story short, the fishers who I'm in contact with, who work out of Dunleary, Wicklow, along the east coast, where, by the way, there's about 800 jobs, direct and indirect, the fishers themselves, processing, other related industries, they say if the Kish and Codling Bank renewable energy plans go ahead on the banks and the seismic surveying has already started, it's already seriously damaging their livelihood, it's seriously impacting on the fish and marine life in those areas, but they say, to cut a long story short, it will completely destroy their livelihood, which, by the way, is illegal under EU directives. One of the things that EU directives make clear is you can't displace one industry with another. It's not allowed. And yet, that's precisely what's happening, because the government has given a pass with the so-called relevant projects for hundreds and hundreds of these enormous wind turbines to be built at very close proximity to the coast on these sandbanks and sensitive areas, which are the richest in marine life and in things like phytoplankton, which, I repeat, is the basis of life on this planet. So if we destroy those ecosystems, we will actually, the emergency of biodiversity will hit us quicker and harder than even the climate emergency, as serious as that is. We were supposed to protect these areas with the marine protected areas. The average in most of the rest of Europe is about 30%, places like Netherlands up I think around 40%, Germany up around 50% protected. We had about 3% protected up until a few years ago, and now it's up to about 7%. We're at the bottom of the league table in terms of protecting the sensitive areas necessary to protect biodiversity, and we have given precisely the sites that should have been protected from a marine biodiversity point of view to the developers and given them a pass on the maritime planning and the things where they should have to pass certain thresholds in terms of the protection of the environment and habitats and so on. Apart from anything else, that will probably open up most of these industrial wind farm plans to legal action, and they will probably find themselves in breach of the Habitats Directive and other EU directives in this regard, marine spatial planning directives. They are almost certainly in breach of them. So it would seem the government, like we did on land development and planning, where in the bad old days developers did what the hell they liked, and of course we got building on floodplains, we got all the damage that caused, the flooding that resulted, that we're now about to repeat the same mistakes in terms of the development of offshore renewable energy. Give it to the private guys, give it to the speculators, give it to the private developers, and wreck the environment in the process, and in the end we don't even get to get any of the benefits. So, to conclude, Minister, we need to develop this. It should be done by the state, it should be done on a not-for-profit basis, and it should be done in line with the directives and just, frankly, the environmental obligation to protect vital areas of biodiversity, marine biology and so on, and that means doing it on a not-for-profit basis, not letting them dictate, and the state itself investing in doing it, most likely a bit further offshore, might be a bit more costly, but in the end it's more sustainable from an environmental and every other point of view.
Thank you, Deputy.